Hello, RDs and RDs to be. Welcome to the RD Exam Ready podcast. My name is Zach Caseberg, your tutor, your coach, your guide along the path to passing the RD exam. My biggest passion is to help RDs and RDs to be just like you to know how to effectively pass the CDR exam. If that sounds like you, then hey, you are in the right place. Hopefully, you got to join us recently for our RD Exam Ready Live that we hosted on YouTube. During that session, we reviewed some practice questions together from all four domains, including a few practice questions that were calculation related. So if you haven't watched that back, make sure you go to that RD Exam Ready YouTube page, subscribe, check out that live section, and look back at any live lessons that we've done. If you need a good hour study session to get in, you don't feel motivated, this would be a great way for you to do it by kind of viewing those videos themselves. I don't know why lately, but I feel like I've been seeing a lot more information on nutrition labeling. It's not because there's any new announcements, not to worry you. There's no new information you need to know for exam day right now, but it's just been more like my job. I'm seeing it a lot more. In practice questions, I'm seeing a lot more labeling. So it really helps me to go into the specific requirements that there are behind labeling an item as we do in the United States. Now, this nutrition labeling, an item, the way we do it, this is all done by the FDA. They're going to be the ones who really go into the type of labeling that's allowed in the United States and the requirements for that. They're here to make sure and ensure that food sold in the US is safe, wholesome, and properly labeled. This applies to food that comes from domestic and foreign sources. The Nutrition Labeling and Education Act, which amended the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, requires that most foods have nutrition labeling and requires food labels to bear nutrition content claims and certain health messages, making sure that they comply with specific requirements set by the FDA. The second act that I want you to be familiar with is going to be the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. And these are the federal laws that govern food products under the FDA's jurisdiction. Keep those two acts in your back pocket in case it was to be referenced on a question, just so you know what it's related to. Who needs to be labeling products is the big question I've always asked. This seems like a really good question to understand. For instance, you may have a little friend that has a cottage kitchen. She might prepare sourdough for you and you pick it up from her. Does she have to have a nutrition facts label? Does she have to list all her ingredients all the way? Well, no, not necessarily. Think logically of what you've actually seen in stores, farmers markets, and around, right? The foods that you're typically going to see that are going to have to require a nutrition content claim, packaging, and everything in between is going to be a packaged food item or it's going to be a food item from somewhere where there's multiple locations. So when a food has been produced in a very small single unit form, single location, mom and pop bar down the street, they're not going to typically be required to do any general food labeling or have those requirements. But we'll talk about this a little more as we go on. What would be required for a label for these is pay attention here. Restaurants with 20 or more locations. Now, these would be restaurants that are more mostly chain based, right? So this would be restaurant style foods offering the same menu or generally the same menu items. And examples of this would be like grocery chains, grocery stores, takeout, delivery, movie theaters, amusement parks, some chain coffee shops, uh, supermarkets, different convenience stores would definitely be required to label their food products. Now, what's going to be required for their food products is they have to give the kilocalorie information on their menu item. You've seen this at McDonald's and at different chains where it'll have like burger and then how many calories are listed in it. So you'd have to have those calories listed on the signs of those foods. You'd also have to provide written nutrition information for menu items if requested. Much of the time, these companies are putting a statement of some kind that says additional information is substantiated upon request. So that's kind of what they're saying. That's a statement that's also required, and they have to have a binder in the back with all of that information. Restaurants of any size that use the term nutrient content claims like low fat or heart healthy, those would have to be substantiated upon request. You can't just throw the label on there without having the data to back it up. All packaged food items must be listed with ingredients and products, including additives, vitamins, and minerals. And ingredients must be listed in descending order by weight. Let's talk about that just a little bit more there. So, When it comes to listing ingredients on an item, what you have to remember is it's going to go in descending order from the highest weight items. So if we took the bread, for example, that we looked at, bread is mostly made up of a few ingredients, right? It's mostly going to be flour, eggs, water, baking soda, vitamins, minerals, right? So as you look at that, it would have to go by the highest amount of weight to the lowest. So it would go in that order, with flour being the highest weight and vitamins and minerals making up the smallest amount of weight there. So you just have to make sure you're listing those things correctly. For those companies that have to substantiate those requests or those food labeling or those packaged items, you also have to make sure you list out the common top 9 allergens in plain language. And what that means is no more confusing people with ingredient lists. What you need to do is if you say, let's say you put tahini paste in hummus, right? So your ingredient list could say tahini, but it wouldn't just say tahini. It would have to say tahini and then parentheses sesame bolded there. That's just a way that they're telling the source of the allergens. So if it's a packaged food item like that, you would be required to put those allergens on there too. On the nutrition facts label itself, there are some requirements since 2016 of what the label must display. Some of this stuff hasn't changed at all. It could be stuff you've always known about if you've been looking at labels the past 10 years, but if you've been looking at them longer, you know that the labels used to look a lot different. One of the major changes was that the serving size that's going to be at the top of that nutrition facts label and number of servings, that's going to be in bold there to help show people what the serving size is so that they know in that case. Also, we know that having those calories in that large bold font right there up the top is going to be helpful so people can see the calorie content for things and not have to read too much. Of course, you're going to have to list out the daily value percentages for specific nutrients. And those specific nutrients that need to be listed would include things like total fat, saturated fat, trans fats, if there actually was any, cholesterol, sodium, dietary fiber, total sugars, as well as added sugars in there. Splitting those up from the group is important. Of course, we have to include protein as we're all looking at protein these days since it's so hot. Now, pay attention to this little point. I just want to make sure you know about the specific vitamins and minerals that need to be listed on a label with their percent daily value. You would need to list out the vitamins of vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. Those four are required there. They're the only four required that has to be on the nutrition facts label. We used to have to list out vitamin A and vitamin C. However, those are no longer required on these updated labels. So just know those big four that I talked about right there. A note kind of with those ingredients, as I said, make sure you list them in descending order, and then making sure that also you keep that plain language for those allergens there, and having it very plain, easy to read, and making it nice and easy on people there too. Now, the next step that we're going to go into is going to be the different claims that we're going to talk about. And we're going to do a lot of talking, a lot of listing here. So buckle in. We're going to start with nutrient claims. These are going to be the biggest kind of list that you'll have to go through here. So I thought we'd knock it out first. Now, with claims, I need you to really remember the detailed definitions here. Okay. I'm going to list out a few things for you, and you're going to make sure you understand them. Good source versus excellent source. A good source in a food is one serving of that food meets 10 to 19% of the daily value for that nutrient. So if a food has, let's say, 15% of your daily iron needs, then that food is considered a good source of iron. If it had 5%, it's nothing. There's no claim at all that it has to have there. Our second kind of designation is excellent source. Excellent source is also called high in or rich in. So these are all the same here. Excellent source, high in, and rich in. Those are all the same statement. For something to be an excellent source of a vitamin or mineral, it would need one serving would need to meet greater than or equal to 20% of the daily value of that nutrient. So good source, 10 to 19%, excellent high end rich in, greater than or equal to 20% of that daily value. Make sure you know that. So if we go back to, more of our examples here, if something has For your calcium, it has 25% of your daily value of calcium. Well, that's considered an excellent source of calcium in that case. A couple other kind of claims I wanted just to clear up as we go through here is going to be gluten free, no gluten, free of gluten, or without gluten. These are all the same statement. There is a specific definition per the FDA of something to be gluten free. Do you know what it is? Well, that's going to be foods that are gluten free must contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten from any source. That's going to be what we use for gluten free there. And that's a good number to keep in your back pocket because this is an easy question if you remember that number here. So, foods that contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten from any source are going to be considered gluten free, free of gluten, without gluten, or no gluten. Now, healthy is another one of these kind of offshoot ones a little bit. We're going to talk about each of these a little more, but we can use something to be healthy if it has the following: the food has to be low in fat, low in saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium, and that it contains at least 10% of the daily value for vitamin D, potassium, iron, calcium, protein, or fiber. So, for a food to be considered healthy, let's list out it needs to be low in what? Well, low in fat, low in saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium. There's four there. That it needs to contain at least 10% of the daily value or be a good source for vitamin D, potassium, iron, calcium, protein, or fiber. So if it has at least 10% of the daily value for those, if it's at least a good source of one of those, it's considered a healthy food. And then it just has to meet those fat and sodium requirements that we listed right before. Let's stick in on calories a little bit here. We're going to kind of take this category by category. Calories. For a food to be considered calorie free, it must contain less than 5 kilocalories per serving. So if an item has 6 calories, it's not going to be calorie free in that case. So if it has less than 5 calories per serving, it's considered calorie free. Sounds funny, right? Low calorie would be 40 kcals or less per serving. So for an item to be low calorie, it would have to have 40 calories or less per serving. Reduced or less calories would be considered at least 25% fewer calories per serving. And light calorie would mean one third fewer kcals compared to foods, and calories must be 50% or less from fat. I want to kind of point out a couple pieces there of these terms that we're leading, okay? So, low calorie or low fat, we're going to see some kind of repeating numbers a little bit through here, but this one's going to really change depending on the item. Low, or let's back that up. Let's say free, right? If something is free of calories, you need to really be thinking pretty low, and I want you to keep 5 in your back pocket for right now. Okay, so calorie free, I want you to keep the number 5 in your mind. For something to be reduced, reduced means a 25% reduction. And this applies for all of these different nutrients we're going to talk about today. So if it's reduced fat, it's 25%. If it's reduced calorie, it's 25%. Makes it easy, right? Same for light. Light would be one third of the normal content of that normal food. One of our best is probably going to be full fat ranch versus light ranch, right? So it's always going to be one third for all of these nutrients. And that's going to be some repeating elements that you see. So let's apply that as we go into fats now. Fat free. When I told you to keep a number in your head for free, what did I tell you to keep in? 5, right? Well, for fat free, it's less than zero point 0.5 grams of fat per serving. That's considered fat free. Saturated fat free would be less than zero point 0.5 grams of fat per serving and less than zero point 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving. I don't think you have to worry about the trans so much, but I think it's good to know for the definition. Low saturated fat would mean it's 1 gram or less of saturated fat per serving. Reduce or less saturated fat would be what percentage? 25% less saturated fat than the comparable food. Low fat. Low fat is going to be 3 grams or less of fat per serving. Okay, so if we're saying, any type of food that we're using, low fat cheese, per serving or per slice, it's going to be 3 grams or less of fat per serving of cheese. Reduced or less fat. Once again, what's the percentage you need to remember? 25% less fat per serving in that case. Very good, everyone. And then, of course, light or light fat, we're talking about a third of the amount of fat per serving. Doing great. Moving on to cholesterol. Cholesterol, for something to be cholesterol free, it would have to have less than 2 milligrams of cholesterol per serving. Not a lot, right? For low cholesterol, it's going to be 20 milligrams or less per serving. For reduced cholesterol, it would be what's the percentage? 25% less cholesterol compared to this regular food. Now, moving on to sodium. Sodium's a cool one because there's actually extra definitions here, which makes it a little complex, but I find it interesting when you're looking at foods to look at it too. For something to be sodium free, we're going to come back to our 5 here. 5 is going to be your key number. So for sodium free and salt free, same definition, it would have less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. To be very low in sodium, which is an actual breakdown, very low, not just low, very low, it would be 35 milligrams or less per serving. Low sodium would be less than 140 milligrams of sodium per serving. Reduced or less sodium would be the 25% reduction that we've already discussed. And then light in sodium is actually another definition here per the FDA. That would be it's reduced by at least 50% per serving. So, like light in sodium broth, for instance. Last two we have to go through here: sugar free and reduced, less sugar. Sugar free, we're going to come back to our 5. Less than 0.5 grams of sugar per serving would be a sugar free item. And reduced or less sugar would be falling back to our 25% reduction that we see on there for sugar compared to a normal food at that point. See, those aren't too bad actually when you're kind of breaking them down. You're going to come to those consistencies of like free, reduced, light, and you're going to fall back on those. It's going to be tremendously helpful when it comes to these questions. Next, I want to talk about other claims. Structure function claims. Here's our definition. A structure function claim is a statement that describes how a component in a food affects or supports the body's structure or function, but does not make reference to a disease. Basically, it's a claim on a food, but it doesn't mention a specific disease. It just talks about how that food benefits the body. So, an example of this is calcium builds strong bones. That would be a structure function claim. Notice how it's not mentioning any disease, condition, cancer, nothing. Another example: fiber maintains bowel regularity. This is a true statement about what fiber does for the structure and function of the body. But it's not talking about colorectal cancer, is it? It's just talking about the structure function. When we start talking about diseases, now we're into health claims. A health claim will describe the relationship between a nutrient or other substance in a food and a health condition or disease. It requires the FDA to review it before use of this claim because it can be very misleading, right? So, a health claim is essentially you're making a claim about how a food or ingredient prevents a disease, right? I've got some good examples here that I like to fall back on. Um, we could say, for instance, like for calcium, right? This is kind of like a one that works for calcium. This substantiated claim per the FDA, it also has to meet certain requirements too. So, let's say for the FDA for calcium, vitamin D, and osteoporosis, the claim itself must be high in calcium or vitamin D. And then the claim would sound like this: adequate calcium throughout life as a part of a well balanced diet may reduce risk of osteoporosis. So, a couple requirements had to be met here. One, the food itself had to be high in calcium and vitamin D in order for this claim to even qualify. And two, the FDA had to review it. Finally, for it to be a health claim, it had to specifically mention a disease. In this case, your disease was osteoporosis. Here's another claim about dietary fat and cancers. Total fat and cancers are our topic here, and our health claim would be a diet low in fat may reduce risk of some cancers. Here's another one. This would be required for all of our low sodium foods. So, Not to say that all those foods are required, but if a food was to make this claim, it would have to be low sodium. Okay. Diets low in sodium may reduce risk of hypertension. That's a really good one, right? Here's another: dietary fat, cholesterol, and risk of coronary heart disease. A food would have to be low fat, low saturated fat, and low cholesterol to meet this required health claim. And the claim could sound something like: diets low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. All good, right? And then one more for us here: fiber foods and cancer. Um, Food would have to be a good source of fiber, it would have to be low fat. And the claim may sound something like: fiber rich foods and products may reduce the risk of some cancers. As you can see, all these health claims are all surrounded upon just some type of disease that we're talking about here, risk of the disease or the disease occurring. Whereas the structure function claim would never mention a disease of any kind, it would just talk about what it's doing for the body. Now, let's tie up this lesson with three solid practice questions using process of elimination. Number one: which of the following statements is valid regarding the use of nutrition labels in a restaurant? A. All items are now required to bear a nutrition facts label. B. An item listed as low sodium on the menu must be substantiated upon request. C. All restaurants are exempt from listing nutrition information. Or D. Only restaurants with more than 15 establishments are required to provide nutrition information. Let's read that question one more time. Which of the following statements is valid regarding use of nutrition labels in a restaurant? So I write A, B, C, and D on my scratch paper here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each answer. And if I like it, I'm going to put a check mark by it. If I hate it, I'm going to cross it out and get it out of my life. If I'm not sure, I'm just going to hold on to it. So let's start with A. All items are now required to bear a nutrition facts label. Well, I don't know about you, but I think I want to get rid of A because it's not all items, right? We talked about the mom and pop bar down the street. They don't have to do nutrition labels. So this is just an overgeneralizing statement. A is out for me. B. An item listed as low sodium on the menu must be substantiated upon request. I think I want to hold on to this answer and I want to read the rest of them. C. All restaurants are exempt from listing nutrition information. Hmm. Similar to A, this is a bit of an overgeneralization, right? We certainly know there's some restaurants that have to label for nutrition stuff, don't they? So C doesn't seem like a good fit. And just like A, I'm going to get rid of those two. D. Only restaurants with more than 15 establishments are required to provide nutrition information. Hmm. Trying to remember, was it 15 establishments or was it more than that? I think it was more than that, and I believe it was actually 20 or more establishments you'd be required to bear a nutrition facts label. B, an item listed as low sodium on the menu must be substantiated upon request. This feels like much more of a legitimate answer because if you make that claim, you'd have to back it up, right? So, which of the following statements is valid regarding use of nutrition labels in a restaurant? I would say B, an item listed as low sodium on the menu must be substantiated upon request. Number two, a dietitian is educating a patient on shopping for heart healthy food items. They recommend shopping for fat free foods which contain less than blank grams of fat per serving. A, 10 grams. B, 3 grams. C, 30 milligrams. Or D, zero point 0.5 grams. So, which of these would really fit with low fat based on what we talked about? Or, excuse me, which of these would fit with fat free is what we need to look into, okay? When we were talking about free, remember I gave you one little reference number that I think helps serve for many of these different foods here. So let's look into it. Which of these would be fat free? A, 10 grams. That doesn't seem very fat free. It kind of seems a bit high in fat to me. B, 3 grams of fat per serving. No, because 3 grams of fat or less per serving would be considered low fat. That would be a low fat item. So B is not out in this either. I'm going to get rid of B. C, 30 milligrams. Well, that seems really odd. Typically, I don't see fat in milligrams. Maybe they're thinking cholesterol here, but C is weird. I might put a question mark by that for right now. D, zero point 0.5. So if I look, I would say zero point 0.5 is my best answer for this as a fat-free food. We talked about how free foods, we see 5 repeating a lot of the time. Not for all of them, but for many of them. So if the dietitian is educating a patient on shopping for heart-healthy food items, if they recommend shopping for fat-free food items, they would have to contain less than zero point 0.5 grams of fat per serving. That would be our answer for number 2. Number 3. Which of the following statements would be considered a structure function claim? A. Foods high in vitamin C may reduce risk of certain cancers. B. Fiber helps maintain normal cholesterol levels. C. A diet low in sodium may decrease the risk of hypertension. Or D. Adequate calcium through life as part of a well balanced diet may reduce the risk of osteoporosis. Which of the following statements would be considered a structure function claim? Okay, so structure function was all about telling how an ingredient helps the body, supports the body. However, they don't mention any disease states in them. So let's look at A. Foods high in vitamin C may reduce the risk of certain cancers. Hmm. Well, because it mentions cancers there, I would feel it's actually much more of a health claim. So I don't think A would be a good fit because we're looking for a structure function claim. B, fiber helps maintain normal cholesterol levels. Okay, I'm going to hold on to that one right now. C, a diet low in sodium may reduce the risk of hypertension. Okay, that's once again, we're mentioning a condition or a disease, so that would make it a health claim. Has to be out for me. D. Adequate calcium through life as part of a well balanced diet may reduce the risk of osteoporosis. Once again, we're talking about a health claim here, so that would not be a good fit. That leaves me with answer B. So, which of the following statements would be considered a structure function claim? Fiber helps maintain normal cholesterol levels. Do you see how that structure function, just based on it stating a fact about this, but it's not making any type of disease, condition, anything like that that it's associating. So that would make that a structure function claim. That wraps up today's lesson, students. I hope you watched, listened, learned, and enjoyed today's show. Remember that passing this exam is a journey. We all need assistance along the way. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button if you haven't, tell other studying students, rate, review, comment, whatever you would like to spread the word. And as always, happy studying to you, RD to be.